Welcome to Hub Hits, our regular program where we give you the analysis and insights of the Hub's best contributors. Today on the program, a pleasure to welcome on John Ibbitson. He's a storied Globe and Mail columnist and now a regular contributor to the Hub. John, great to be in conversation with you today about a terrific article that you wrote for the Hub.
Thanks, Rudyard.
This article is about the revenge of the elites, John, the revenge of what you call the Laurentian elites coming out of Monday's election. Who are Laurentian elites? Define this group for us.
Sure. They are the political, public service, academic, business, cultural, media elites living in the watershed of the St. Lawrence River. So essentially Southern Ontario and Quebec, essentially Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal.
And how important, John, are they to understanding, I don't know, the last 25, 50 years, 200 years of Canadian, politics, history, geography, economics? Are they the Rosetta Stone to figuring out how and why Canada looks the way it does today?
Through most of Canada's history, the Laurentian elite have governed the country and have largely governed by consensus. Not always. There have been big divisions over issues such as conscription in the First and Second World War, over the role of Quebec within Canada, over the free trade with the United States. So there have been divisions, but for the most part, the Laurentian elite have governed consensually. And until relatively recently, the Canada that we live in is the Canada that they created.
Okay. Who's not a Laurentian elite? Is this specifically a geographic thing, or are there different, parts of the economy, different political orientations that you would say, okay, that person is not a card-carrying member of this so-called Laurentian elite?
I'd say it's both horizontal and vertical. Yes, there's a class component to it, working class people, Indigenous people, new arrivals. Probably are not card-carrying members of the Laurentian elite, but it's also regional. I think Alberta and Saskatchewan and the West in general feels justifiably excluded from the central Canadian Laurentian elite and have been unhappy about it for decades.
I'm fascinated about elites, why societies have them. I mean, generally, we don't like them. We push back. We feel that they're trying to run our lives and control us. At the same time, if you go through history, John, elites, in a sense, are a feature, not a bug when it comes to most societies. Have the Laurentian elites been good for Canada? Writ large, like if you step back, can you imagine the country without them?
Yeah, Daryl Bricker and I wrote a book called The Big Shift back in 2012. Where we talked about the Laurentian elite, the Laurentian consensus, and the new challenge to the Laurentian elite that was emerging from what we called the conservative coalition. But we said in the Big Shift that we are ourselves members of the Laurentian elite. And we think that if you believe Canada is a well-governed and successful country, and we believe that in the main it has been, then the Laurentian elites deserve credit because they were the ones who crafted the Canada that we have.
What about, John, this perception? We have let me declare it, a bias here at the Hub that the last decade can be characterized as a lost decade in terms of a lot of key economic factors, whether it's per capita GDP, whether it's foreign investment, whether it's Canadian incomes adjusted for inflation vis-a-vis the United States. There's a lot to suggest economic mismanagement over the last decade. There's lots to suggest possibly, maybe you agree or disagree, cultural mismanagement, vilification of Canadian history and symbols over the last decade. I presume, John, perpetuated largely by this Laurentian elite. So could we say that the last decade has not been a particularly fortunate time for the country to have this particular elite that you're discussing in positions of command and control over our economy, our government, and our culture?
Yeah, and what you're defining is the legacy of the Justin Trudeau Liberal government. And historians will judge in the main whether he succeeded and when he succeeded. I've written in the past that I think Trudeau's first government was generally successful. in renegotiating a free trade agreement with the United States, for example. I think the Trudeau government can also be credited with getting Canada through the COVID pandemic. We had one of the lowest mortality rates in the developed world. But there were other aspects of the Trudeau government that were much less successful. One was the industrial policy of trying to sort of engineer growth through federal investments. There was also, I think, most unfortunately, an over-reliance on immigration to the point where the immigration system became broken and actually turned Canadians against immigration. That if that is permanent, if there is now a permanent Canadian feeling that there are too many immigrants coming into this country, that would be a tragedy, because that is Canada's great multicultural competitive advantage. And it would be a terrible legacy of the Trudeau government if indeed it were lost.
Well, fantastic. You've given us a crash course on who and what the Laurentian elite are. Now let's jump to Monday's election. In your article, you characterize the election as the Laurentian elite strikes back. What are you getting at here, John? Why was Monday a big victory for this particular group?
In the big shift, Daryl and I argued that there was a challenge to the Laurentian consensus emerging. In fact, perhaps even a more dominant new coalition. And that was the Conservative coalition that Stephen Harper forged when he created the Conservative Party of Canada. And it consisted of two groups. One, Western voters. And those voters were becoming more numerous and more influential as Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia grew in population and in prominence. That Conservative coalition from the West allied with voters in the 905, the suburban cities surrounding Toronto, named after their original area code. And the 905 contained a great many immigrant voters, new Canadians, many of them from places like India and China and Philippines and other developing countries. And we maintained that the Conservative challenge to the Laurentian elite, consisting of Western voters and the 905, could pose a very credible threat to the Laurentian consensus in any given election. And indeed, although Justin Trudeau won the popular vote in 2015, he lost it in both 2019 and 2021, although he held on to the 905. And them's his hold on to the 905 gets to be the government. It looked as though the Conservative coalition was about to completely dominate the federal government. As you know, Justin Trudeau was enormously unpopular, and Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives were 20 points and more ahead of them as late as the middle of December. Then, of course, Mr. Trudeau stepped down. He was replaced by Mark Carney, and that former Bank of Canada governor and Bank of England governor was confronted by Donald Trump, who was incoming as his second term. Mr. Trump declared that he was going to wage economic war on Canada through tariffs, and indeed urged Canada to agree to annexation as the 51st state. The Laurentian elites rallied behind Mark Carney. The 905 rallied behind Mark Carney. Older voters, especially in the 905, rallied behind Mark Carney. And although the Conservatives did very well, gaining more than 41% of the vote, which would normally be enough for a comfortable majority government, indeed, they placed second to an even larger proportion of Liberal voters, ranking around 44%. So I argued in my column this was the revenge of the Laurentian elites against the Conservative coalition. One last time, perhaps. That's going to have to wait to be seen.
Yeah, fantastic piece. And I urge our viewers and listeners to check it out on the Hub right now. I want to point to this guy. For those of you listening, I'm pointing my thumb at Mark Carney. In a lot of different ways, John, this will be our last topic of discussion. He would seem to check all the boxes as to a card-carrying member of the Laurentian elite. Is that a correct way to characterize Mark Carney? I'm not doing this pejoratively. I'm just simply stating on the basis of his education, his roles and functions inside government as our former central banker, his proclivities towards more government involvement in the economy, a strong role for Ottawa in kind of shaping the rules of the road for the rest of the country in terms of trade, commerce, and investment.
Yes, if you had asked me to name, the personification of the Laurentian elite prior to him becoming prime minister, I might very well have said Mark Carney. Now, of course, he was born in the Northwest Territories, largely raised in Edmonton, but the Laurentian elite are permeable. You can come to them from anywhere. It's who you know and what you believe that makes you a member of that elite. And Mark Carney, as a former central bank governor, not to mention as someone who lives in Ottawa, and who went to Harvard and to Oxford, and who has an industrial policy that involves, among other things, what looks like a federal crown corporation to spur housing. That is an extraordinary Laurentian policy to embrace, and he's embracing it. So yes, I think they don't get much more Laurentian than Mark Carney.
Yeah. For viewers, my favorite pick always has been to describe this particular kind of species of elite in Canada was David Johnston, our former Governor General, and yes, useful handyman to Justin Trudeau at a lot of different causes and institutions over the course of his premiership. John, this has just been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for writing this piece for The Hub today, and thank you for coming on our YouTube channel to unpack it all for our listeners and viewers.
Richard, it was a pleasure.
That's John Ibbitson, best-selling author of The Shift, among many other books. You got to check it out on Amazon. He's also a regular contributor here at The Hub. And if you, like me, grew up reading John Ibbitson at the Globe and Mail, well, you too might be a member of the Laurentian elite. Thanks for watching this edition of Hub Hits. We'll be back to you with more of the Hub's best commentary and analysis on this channel in the days to come. Stay tuned. Until then, bye-bye.